We're live.
Hello, welcome back to This Week in Haiti Live. And this week we're joined by Torkil Lauesen. I met Torkil now probably virtually first, but probably 4 years ago, or maybe, yeah, 4 years ago. Um, and it was through learning about Torkel's political work and political activity, but also through the theoretical research and work, particularly in the history of one book was the history of Sweden a little bit. Sweden's rise as a colonial power and how that's a particular phenomenon. Yeah. Um, Particularly through international trade. We also uh, connected over unequal exchange and international trade. That's okay. It's not gonna.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and that was through the research of Argyri Emanuel, who uh, we have talked a little bit about and has been discussed a little bit in Haiti Liberté in the context of the Congo, his connection to Lumumba. Um, so today, though, we are kind of going away from our usual podcast or discussion, particularly here as it connects to uh, the work here in Brooklyn and in New York, and connecting that to Haiti, and being internationalist. Well, that part is not. We're not departing from that, but we have been for the past couple of months reporting about the transition that Haiti is undergoing, and that transition is mainly one the nature of U.S. imperialism in Haiti. The roots are not really changing, but the kind of particular structure, of course, Trump is impacting it a lot. But even before that, we were looking into how Biden was doing things. And that was really through the UN, and the UN's role in Haiti has been unique since even 1994, 2004. The UN has been very active in Haiti, likewise in other global South countries like the Congo as well. But the UN has done peacekeeping missions and very much interventionist. And that came up because about maybe like 3 or 4 months ago, Kim was at the UN. We had spoken to the UN before, UN Security Council, about the possibility of intervention again in Haiti by the US, which the US has been doing since 1915, since even really before that, historically. But recently, the UN has been kind of their smokescreen, I guess you could say. And one of the discussions was about how the other powers at the UN and in the UN Security Council would respond, particularly China and Russia. Torkel's research really is looking into those nations, are very much part of it. And in his latest book, The End of Capitalism and the Long Transition to Socialism, it's very much a focus is the question of how the socialist state, the socialist transitional state, what is that? How can it, come into existence? How do we move away from the capitalist state to begin with as part of the overarching transition from capitalism to socialism? And of course, in that discussion, China and the Soviet Union, today Russia, are heavily featured, as well as the Paris Commune, Cuba as well. So that's the question that we've been dealing with. Really, the big question for many anti-imperialists looking today at the global scene is, how is multipolarity going to affect the transition to socialism? How can these other powers counterbalance U.S. imperialism? And for us, looking at it from here, connecting that to Haiti as a global South nation, as not necessarily subject to the will. I don't think you could put it that way, but very much as we all are dependent on the entire realm of global affairs, and the UN being a big part of that, the Security Council being a big part of that, the question of nuclear weapons, nuclear power, and deterrence being part of that. So that's a long introduction, and I don't know if I did total justice to the longevity of Torkil's work, which people can look up and research. But suffice it to say, that's a bit of introduction, and I think, Kim, I'll pass it over to you either to add on what I missed in that introduction, or pose a question, or continue that.
Yes, well, I guess the way I would start would be, we're in what, who knows, maybe the opening acts of the Third World War, as we see the U.S. and Western Europe taking on Iran to start with, but clearly Russia and China are standing at its back and supporting it. How do you see, or what is your assessment of their role so far, and how do you see events, to the extent that your crystal ball is functional, unfolding in the months, weeks and months ahead?
Well, in what I'm saying, I am taking the long and global perspective, but I think that in the recent years we have seen a lot of dramatic events, one after the other. Basically, a lot of geopolitical struggle, U.S. military intervention in the Middle East, in Venezuela, in Nigeria, in Somalia, and now in Iran. And for the first look, it might seem that the U.S. is mighty and strong and back again, but I don't see it that way. As a Marxist, I look at the long and global perspective, and I have a strong eye on economics. And actually, I think that what we have seen in the last decade is actually that then after maybe 150 years of economic dominance, the imperial core is actually losing its economic dominance over the world system, basically from the end of the 19th century and throughout the 20th century. The US have been the dominating economic power in the world system after the British Empire. They ended colonialism and established a new form of imperialism, neo-colonialism, and they actually kept capitalism very dynamic by the neoliberal globalization. But actually, by the beginning of the 21st century, they were beginning to lose their economic dominance. For the first time in 200 years, a third world country became a strong economic power. Especially China became the industrial most important in industrial power in the world from 78 until 2015. China 30 doubled its GNP, and it became the world's leading industrial power. But what is more interesting is that in the past 10 years, also in qualitative terms, China has becoming a very strong economic power. They have become leading in many high-tech technologies, mega computers, robots, artificial intelligence, new form of energy, solar energy and wind energy, and so on. So what we are seeing now is that the US is trying to use its military to keep its hegemony of the world system, and this is what we are seeing. But actually, if we are looking at the economics, the US is losing ground, and even its military is built on a very shaky fundament. You know, it's paid by the state budget, and the state budget has a very big deficit, which is financed by printing dollars and issuing bonds. And this is and the US is only able to do this because the dollar is the world money. And actually now new financial systems alternative to Bretton Woods are beginning to appear, and many countries in the global south are talking about making their trade in their own currency and leaving the dollar as world money, and so on and so on. And this is a very, very dangerous situation for the US, because if they lose the position of the dollar of the world money, it will be very difficult for them to keep this scheme of having a huge deficit on the state budget, and by this paying their military expenditures. So even in the military sense, they are building their power on a shaky fundament.
Mm-hmm. On a shaky foundation, yeah, because that reserve currency is in play. Right now, we see that the offensive is not, of course, just against Iran, but Venezuela, Cuba, Palestine, of course, are all also targets, not to mention Russia via Ukraine. It seems we are fast approaching a point where the battle lines, if you will, of the global confrontation between China, the BRICS, those looking for a new multipolar world order, and the transatlantic imperialisms, that this battle line is being drawn right now. Yesterday in Florida, or maybe it was the day before, Trump held a press conference called Latin American Shield, I think it was called, the Shield of the Americas. And he only managed to get 4 nations to take part in that. I think they were Dominican Republic, Argentina, of course, with Malay, Honduras, and I'm forgetting the 4th. It might have been Ecuador. But in any case, they seem, even among their former vassal states which were under their thumb or under their control, they seem to be slipping drastically, especially as Iran has sort of ignited people's imagination, shall we say, with their strong resistance and the number of ballistic missiles they've been able to land in Israel, as far as Cyprus, etc. So this, how would you see in your, again with your crystal ball, this alignment of those nations? Is this going to be something that continues to be on a kind of proxy war basis, or do you think there'll be a formal, shall we say, alliance formed of countries around these besieged nations, such as Iran, Cuba, Palestine, versus the US and Western European powers?
Well, as you
Do you think
mentioned,
there'll be a formal alliance, like two sides, like the Axis versus the Allies in the Second World War?
maybe, but what we are seeing for the time being is also actually a political weakness in terms of imperialism. We can see the split between the US and Europe. Europe have always looked upon the United States as their lead dog in the triad of the North America, Western Europe, and Japan. But with Trump, actually, the US has chosen to go alone. They did not discuss the attack on Iran with their NATO partners in Europe. They just did it, and they have also turned against their NATO alliance in terms of harming their industry by the tariff, and also by criticizing their partnership in NATO. So we are seeing this alliance is breaking up, and I think that maybe Europe are beginning to see that they maybe will be dragged down by the US, because the Europeans need that open global economy, which the US is disrupting by tariffs and blockades and sanction and so on. So they are beginning to see that their alliance with the US maybe is very dangerous. So we are seeing a weakening in that side. If we take the other side, the BRICS and the other formations in the global south, well, this is actually what unites them is that they are fed up with US hegemony, but they are of course also not united in some kind of aspiration for socialism or anti-capitalism or even anti-imperialism. They have each their own national agenda. The Russians have theirs, the Chinese have theirs, Saudi Arabia have theirs, and Brazil have theirs. So I don't think that they are united in some kind of political and economic vision yet, but I think that it might happen in the future. Actually, I think that if we see a continuation in the decline of US hegemony, and if we see the strengthening slowly of some kind of multipolar world system, I think the main contradiction in the future will be between different kinds of nationalism in this multipolar world system on one side, and on the other side, the aspiration of some kind of universal socialism, because that's very needed if we want to solve global inequality and also the global climate crisis. They can only be solved if we have some kind of universal socialist approach. So I think this contradictions between the nationalism and universal socialism is very, very important. And if you go to the different countries, you will also see the importance of this contradiction in the development of China and its policy of China with policy of developing socialism with China's characteristic. There's also this balance in this development between a narrow Chinese nationalism and, on the other side, the need to develop a universal global socialism.
In some ways, I think that the Haitian Revolution kind of factors that in quite a bit. I mean, Haiti in its revolution and then the subsequent constitution said that anybody who wants to fight against slavery can be a Haitian citizen. So there was already some idea, and then they were helping other revolutions in Venezuela, Colombia, with Simón Bolívar. So even though there can be some discussion whether Haiti was an anti-capitalist revolution because it was sort of still focused on the pre-capitalists and dealing with slavery, but some of those kind of questions about borders and going being internationalist, I think were part of the revolution, or still part of the continuity of the revolution. You want to?
Yeah, I was just on the previous point you were just making, Torkil. Do you think that, granted, there is a diversity of outlooks and political orientations of the different member states of this new multipolar alliance, such as the BRICS, etc. However, do you think with the collapse or unraveling of the United States and Western Europe, of those capitalist states, that the socialist movements in those countries will begin to gain strength, given that much of their lifetime of the past century or 80 years has been suppressed by various means, by the capitalist countries, the NED or the CIA, etc. Do you think that the socialist movement in India will begin to take supremacy over Modi, or in I don't know, in Brazil, that the sort of waffling Lula will be replaced by more militant members of the Workers' Party, etc. Do you think that there can be a rejuvenation and, in fact, a resurgence of the world socialist movement in this period?
In the global south, I think so, because even the simple fact that what I call the transitional mode of production in China is more effective than capitalism. Mm-hmm. That a mode of production which have politics in command is more effective, will attract a lot of country to that model. It's the first time actually in history where a planned economy and a mixed economy is more effective than capitalism. The Soviet Union never reached that point, but now actually they are more effective. So a lot of countries which are looking for development in the global south will see that this model is more effective, and they will be attracted to going in this way. And also the the decline of US and a stronger multipolar world system will open space for movements, socialist movements in the global South. I think that what we are seeing now, and what we have seen in the past decade, is that okay, US militarism can make a lot of destructions, but they are not very effective in building a viable capitalist stable government after the destructions. We can see they have not been able to do it in Libya and Syria, in Iraq. They will not be able to do it in Palestine, and they will not be able to do it in Iraq. So actually, they are just making destruction and splitting and so on. But in that way, actually, also they make room and space for transition to a more advanced and more progressive political progress, because they themselves, they have very, very few visions for the future. And actually, China has visions for building another kind of global governance structure and so on. But the US have not. Their only vision is making American great again, and this is not shared even by their allies. It is not shared, and certainly not in the global South. So on the ideological and political stand, they are very weak because they have no visions anymore. They cannot rule the world as they used to rule the world, and they cannot. They have difficulty in finding a new way to rule the world. So it's not only an economic crisis; it's also a huge political crisis and a cultural crisis, which the West is going through. It's a cultural crisis because no one is looking up to the West anymore. They don't see their form of democracy. They can see their double standards when they talk about human values and human dignity. So
we even announced it themselves with the speech of Canada at the Munich Forum.
Yeah. So it's not only an economic crisis; it's also a political and cultural crisis. And I think that opens up a space for other perspectives of how the world should look.
And just to, I know I keep asking kind of impossible questions, but what sort of advice would you give to the nations of, say, Venezuela and Cuba right now, who are probably being throttled the most severely by this desperate U.S. empire?
Well, I think that they cannot confront the U.S. on this high-tech level warfare. So they should prefer a defense of their sovereignty and a defense of their home country on the ground, because the U.S. might be able to bomb them from the air, but to make a regime transfer, they have to go in and they have to establish another kind of political power, and they have to destroy the power of the people on the ground, and this will be very difficult for them. So they have to prepare for this kind of warfare, I think, and I think they will lose this kind of warfare. So they should prepare for this long-term confrontation with the capitalism. China will not be able to have some kind of they don't have the military capability to make a global projection of military power. They will not be able to defend Venezuela or Cuba, and Russia will not be able to do it either. So what China hope for, I think, is that we are not going to see a major global war. Worst of all, a major global nuclear war. They want to avoid that, but because if they can avoid that in 2-3 decades, they will win the economic battle, and they will see that the U.S. power will crumble. So I think this is their strategy.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to monopolize the questions. So do you think, as you see this period unfolding, it will be helpful to the ideological health and development of the world's masses as they move forward? I mean, I take the case of Haiti, for example. We are a Marxist-Leninist weekly. We've been around for 20 years. I previously worked at another one for 30 years prior to that, or 25 years. So the point being that the uprising in Haiti today, the anti-systemic struggle, is happening almost spontaneously, almost autonomously from the streets and ghettos of Haiti. There was no political party or even politician who spearheaded this armed uprising of the ghettos. It was really a spontaneous formation of these groups. However, they are hungry for and need some sort of ideological, political models to follow. They're looking for that. Do you think this period, with the struggles and the sort of, shall we say, clumsy and even stupid moves of the empire and the timorous and timid responses of Europe, do you think this will encourage them to down the socialist road?
I'm not very knowledgeable about Haiti and what's going on in Haiti, and I think that what we need is innovation, actually, both in tactic and in praxis, but also in how socialism could be built and how it should look like. We should not. I don't think that we can copy paste all strategies and old praxis. We cannot copy paste from the Paris Commune. We cannot copy paste from the Soviet Union or from China or from even Cuba, which is close to Haiti. It has to find its own way forward, built on the specific situation in Haiti and the subjective forces in Haiti. But of course, they can have some inspiration from what has going on in Cuba or in Venezuela, but they need also some kind of innovation of their own strategy, and we should be open for that and not trying to press over their heads some kind of historical system and historical strategies and way of fighting, because
formulas.
we need innovation more than copy paste from history.
Very good.
Kind of, I guess on that note, when I was kind of starting off thinking about the role, again, with respect to Haiti, of the question of copy paste, or kind of the old model, even from the Cold War, was that, you had the Soviet Union and the US blocs, and they would kind of counterbalance each other with nuclear weapons and whatnot. And in some ways, there's hope to replicate that with China and Russia today. Again, with the body of the UN, have them, at the UN veto US proposals. And in some ways, it's frustrating to see them abstain at the Security Council from certain things. And then, they're calculating their political capital and deciding, based on that, what is rational to do, or what is just, not strategic at the moment. But I guess how, as you mentioned, hoping that there will be 20 years of economic conflict that China and this other bloc can sort of prove themselves in to the rest of the world and the world's majority. But how could they, use these existing but flawed bodies like the UN, these institutions? How should they, should they be more confrontational with the US? And they already are, but should they be even more? Should they, the Soviet Union, left the UN at one point, and should they kind of look to that example of just
Well, we should note also that the UN Secretary General Guterres said that by the summer, the UN will have to close its doors because it won't have any more money. So is the US empire, the Donald Trump administration, going to let the UN die a natural death? That's another question that might be thrown in there.
Well, first of all, I think that the UN, it's correct that the UN have become very, very weak. But it's why has the UN become very, very weak? It's because that the United States and Western Europe don't dominate the UN anymore. So they can see that many UN institutions and the General Assembly and so on was going more and more against the US and Western Europe and the imperialist power. So actually they dropped the UN. UN was not any more useful for them. So they have decided to drop it, and you can see it in the Palestine conflict. UN have had no power at all, and we can see it now in the Iranian and also in Venezuela. It was a clear violation against international law and all the rules of the UN, but they didn't give a shit. And even the European countries didn't give a shit and said, "Oh yeah." So I think the United Nations is very, very weak at the moment, and I don't think that we can or should expect China to to save the world. Countries like Haiti or Venezuela or Iran and Brazil and Congo, they have to make their own revolutions. They cannot expect China to do it. I think China's main objective now is to defend their own revolution, and actually they are 1.4 billion people, and it's a huge project, and they give priority to this. We have seen in history short instances where a major power prioritized a global revolution. It was the Soviet Union from 1919 and into the 20s, where they through the Comintern give high prioritization to a world revolution, but also because they saw a world revolution as the only thing which could save the Russian Revolution and save the Soviet Union. Then they turned into socialism in one country in the 30s, but that's another story. And also the same thing was with China in the 60s and the first years of the 70s. They also had this prioritization of a world revolution, or at least a lot of revolutions in the third world, and supported this. But it was actually also, I think, with the aim of taking China out of its very isolated positions in the 60s. I think actually, and the only power which have taken the world revolution very serious over a long period is actually Cuba. But Cuba is a small power, but they have actually taken the task of helping the world revolution very serious, all the way back to Che Guevara until today, and I tip my hat for that.
Yeah. Let me just, I mean, we've sort of touched on the worst case scenario, nuclear war, that, you know, either the US or Israel or start to throw around nuclear weapons to forestall this disintegration of their system. But let's take a best case scenario that we avoid a nuclear war.
Yeah.
And the countries begin to liberate themselves. Now, in as much as socialism is not just the distribution of poverty, how do you see the transition? Let's say Haiti wins its national liberation, and they, you know, drive out the imperialists and the bourgeoisie that served them, and the people take over, and you have basically many Cubas being born in Latin America. But many of these nations have practically no industry. They have, you know, their agricultural societies growing maybe rice and sugarcane and bananas. How do you see the industrial base, the means of production being developed in those countries in that period after the political or military struggles have subsided? What role would a China or a Russia or a more industrialized country play in this period? In as much as your specialty is transition from colonialism to.
Actually, I'm concerning this question. I'm very optimistic, because I think one of the main reasons why I was also very optimistic in the 70s that national liberation struggles in the third world, which was going on in many countries in Asia, Latin America, and Africa at the time. I was very optimistic that these national liberation struggles could be turned into economic liberation struggles and cut the pipeline to imperialism and de-link from imperialism and starting to build socialism. But this didn't happen. And I think the main thing was that the main reason for this was that core capitalism was still very dynamic. It was in the core capitalism that we saw the huge development of the productive forces, and they controlled the world market, and the third world could not escape the power of the world market and the imperialist core and its dynamic capitalism. So they actually slipped back to capitalism more or less. But today I think the situation, as I mentioned before, that we now have a former third world country, not only in the quantitative sense but also in the qualitative sense, at the top of developing the productive forces, and they could do it because politics are in command, and they are able to allocate resources and to coordinate science on the universities with making prototypes and making into the industry and making finished products very, very quickly. The time from a scientific breakthrough to an actually product based on this scientific breakthrough it's much shorter in China than it is in the capitalist world, because of politics are in command. And we certainly need in a multipolar world system with more or less socialist states, we certainly need a development of the productive forces, because we need to build a lot of hospitals, a lot of universities, and we need to produce food and a lot of goods which are in need, and we need to do it in a sustainable way. And we also need to develop distributions systems which are more equal. And I think that one of the tools for that is, of course, to build a global plan economy. And it is not impossible to build a global plan economy. It's just to create the institutions to do it. But it will certainly be necessary to solve the global problems of inequality and also the planetary problems of ecology.
Mm-hmm. So are you saying, in a sense, rather than many little Chinas being built around the globe, you would see a sort of incorporation of the newly freed nations of the world into a kind of a larger world economy, as it were?
We cannot have advanced socialism without a global plan economy. Mm-hmm. Surely no, and why not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow.
But that again depends on the development of this consciousness of the balance between nationalism and universal socialism.
Yeah.
And I think that nationalism have been a problem for socialism throughout its whole history, and we need a lot of more discussion about the role of nationalism in socialism, actually.
But Torkil, isn't it also the case that, in as much as the nation is itself an invention of the bourgeoisie, wasn't it the existence of the bourgeois states which really stoked and maybe gave a sort of false afterlife to a lot of nationalisms and kept them from becoming a sort of internationalist consciousness?
Yes, the national state is manufactured by capitalism, but it's not something God given and a natural thing, and it's a concept which I think we need to overcome if we are going to build an advanced socialism, because I think that even we can see nationalism have played a very destructive role in for instance the struggle between China and Soviet Union in the 60s, and this was weakening the socialist project, not only I think between China and Russia, but also in the third world. This conflict split a lot of movements in Africa and Latin America and in Asia, and it was very destructive. We've also seen a war between China and Vietnam in 79, 78, 79. So it's not an issue which are not important, and we should not repeat that mistakes, I think.
Well, I don't know if we've held Torkil long enough. Do we have more to cover here? I mean, we could go on for a long time. We don't want to wear out our audience. But
I think maybe we can make a talk another day and think about some new issues to talk about. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Torkil, very much.
Yeah, thanks, Torkil. Always a pleasure, and see you next time.
Yeah.
Okay. So long.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, you want to do